Hello, everybody. How are you
Hello.
today?
Great.
Hello.
Wonderful. I'm so excited. Welcome, everybody, and happy Women's History Month. I'm Elizabeth Elfenbein, the founder and CEO of Under the Sisterhood, and your host for today. And Amy Danielson from programming will be hosting the chat. Please drop your names and locations and any questions you have into the chat throughout our conversation today. On behalf of Under the Sisterhood, I am so grateful you're joining us for Women's March for Change, our event. It's a conversation bringing together extraordinary leaders who are reshaping industries, communities, and systems around the world. For those of you who may be new to our work, Under the Sisterhood is a story sharing company for women, documenting and amplifying women's lived experiences across health, leadership, identity, and culture. Through podcasts, through documentaries, expert conversations like this one, and initiatives like Under the Hood of Women's Health, we gather voices from across generations and around the world. These stories become more than narratives. They reveal patterns and insights and truths that can shape healthcare, shape leadership, and shape culture. Today's conversation is part of that mission. During Women's History Month, we are not only honoring the women who came before us, we are amplifying the leaders who are actively marching for change today. We are honored to be joined by three extraordinary women whose work is transforming health innovation, creative economies, and global sustainability. Let's begin by meeting our panelists and begin marching for change together. Our first panelist I'm excited to introduce is Dr. Malvina Edelman, Health Innovation and Regulatory Systems Leader. Dr. Edelman is a globally recognized leader in medical product, innovation, and regulatory science. After more than 3 decades at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, where she helped advance regulatory frameworks enabling the safe introduction of transformative medical technologies, she now leads several platforms and advancing health innovation globally. She currently serves as the CEO of CCOI, which is the Collaborative Community on Ophthalmic Innovation, where she convenes stakeholders across the health innovation ecosystem to align on endpoints, standards, and evidence frameworks that accelerate global progress in healthcare. She's also the co-founder of Solution Health and president and CEO of Solution Nexus, an expert-driven AI-accelerated platform helping organizations advance diagnostic and therapeutic technologies from early development through global approval and adoption. Together, these efforts are redefining how breakthrough medical innovations move from discovery to global patient impact. Welcome, Dr. Edelman.
Thank you. It's truly a pleasure to join you, Elizabeth, today. I'm very excited about this conversation and sharing the thoughts with other amazing women on this podcast.
I just love it. I'm so thrilled that you're here for so many reasons. You are such a tremendous leader in all that you do. But as a woman and, having shared your story on the podcast and your origins, just getting to know you has been really special. So I love this first question, Malvina. What first inspired you to step into health innovation and regulation? And when did you realize that you could influence more than outcomes, but systems as well?
Well, thank you for that great question. So I think the two in different stages of my life. Innovation, I feel like innovation of medical products and healthcare is sort of part of my DNA. My dad is an inventor and a biomedical engineer. And ever since I was a little tiny girl, he spent innumerable hours telling me about these magic machines that can truly transform human lives. And that passion, that excitement for the potential and the possibility was so infectious that I knew I wanted to dedicate my life to it. I see my camera is doing something funny, so let me try to fix it. So I just thank you. So I decided, it almost wasn't even a question of whether I'm going to pursue my passion for innovation. My only question growing up is how I'm going to achieve transforming what I thought were dreams of truly having impacts on the world and on the patients and on the lives into something actionable and realistic. So I wanted to follow my dad's footsteps. I decided I'm going to be a biomedical engineer, got my degrees in electrical engineering and biomedical engineering. And then as I was finishing up, I figured out that wasn't really enough, that in order to truly, truly understand and make the impact, I needed to have an MD. So I pursued a degree at Harvard MIT, a joint program in something called health science and technology, which was an incredible background, allowing me to truly understand how to combine basic science and medicine into medical products that can change the healthcare. So with that in mind, then I was trying to figure out my next passion, and I did my thesis in ophthalmology. I knew that's the subspecialty I wanted to pursue. And as I was finishing as my year as a chief in my ophthalmology, I was trying to decide on my next career steps. And as all academically trained doctors, I was deciding between a career in private practice and academia. And totally by chance, I came across, in those days, it was still hard journals, paperbacks. I was sitting there flipping through ophthalmology, which is our big blue journal, we like to call it, looking at the ads, and I saw this ad for a reviewer at Food and Drug Administration. And at the time, to be honest with you, I had no idea what FDA does and what's its impact. But I was curious enough that I decided to contact them. I came in for an interview, and in a very brief couple of hours, they explained to me the impact of FDA on the whole ecosystem and the potential of regulation to truly transform innovation. And as they say, the rest was history. I was hooked, and I joined Food and Drug Administration, and I spent 3 decades there, truly maximizing the potential of regulatory science to transform global innovation.
Well, I'm kind of curious, and thank you for that. Just hearing you describe it, Malvina, one thing I'm curious about when sometimes we're in the process of doing our jobs. We're so busy doing. But did you, at that time you were doing over those 3 decades, were you thinking of the impact on a systems level versus the impact that you're having on an outcomes for patients level?
Yeah, definitely. And that is actually the reason that I stayed. Many, many people over the decades asked me why somebody with my training and my expertise would be willing to accept the federal government salary and make the financial sacrifices. And I I am a true believer that what I could do in that role in one day had often more impact than I could do as a practicing physician in a year, because every one of my decisions impacted thousands and sometimes millions of patients around the globe. And while I absolutely love clinical medicine, there's no way that in my one lifetime I could have direct impact on as many patients as I had the privilege of impacting in my roles at FDA.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's interesting, Malvina, that you said that. Like a lot of the physicians I've interviewed over the past few years talk about the reason why they left being a clinician is they can affect one life at a time versus looking at mass. So I think that's really interesting. And I love the fact that in one day, the impact you can have can be so far greater. I just want to say thank you as well for making that decision to go into the FDA, taking the road less traveled economically, if you will, to pursue something that could really do good on a systems level and really affect outcomes. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Lulu now. Lulu, our creative economy architect and ecosystem builder. Lulu Chabelle is the founder and CEO of Lulu Bell Group, a strategic ecosystem builder transforming African fashion, design, and creative industries into global competitive economic assets. Over the past 2 decades, she has unlocked international and commercial opportunities for hundreds of designers across Africa and the Caribbean, from Portugal Fashion to Dubai's Afra World Fashion Confluence and the Mercado Project at Rockefeller Center. A recognized champion of African creative innovation, Lulu's work spans commercial strategy, strategic partnerships, and cultural narrative building that reframes African craftsmanship as a powerful economic force. Through initiatives like the Alke Ball, which is going to be happening in the fall, she's advancing the infrastructure necessary for long-term creative sovereignty, cultural recognition, and economic inclusion. Welcome, Lulu. But I just want to say, Lulu is in the UK, and you can tell everybody where you're on. You're on the phone with us, not on with someone else. But welcome, Lulu.
Thank you. Yes, I'm actually in London. We are putting up an exhibition at St. James's Palace. So I'm hiding in a corner taking this call because we're right in the middle of production. So excuse the noise. But it's such a pleasure to be here, to be part of this conversation, and a pleasure to meet my fellow panelists as well.
Well, welcome, Lulu. I love this question because you've been doing this for a long time, and based on our conversations, understanding your journey, I think the audience will really want to know what ignited your commitment to transforming African fashion and design into scalable economic power.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Interesting question, because I think mine was never a linear arrival to what I do today, but it actually began as a contradiction. A contradiction because I grew up in Tanzania with my aunts and family and friends around me that were very well dressed. I grew up in a household full of textiles because my mother, among many things, was a seamstress. And she knew how to do garment construction. She knew how to put the best of what African craft is into the designs. But, and globally, I mean, as far as Africa is concerned, this was not something that only she could do, but it was some of the crafts and designs that a lot of people would do. Because as you know, Africa is rich in design language, it's rich in textile traditions, it's rich in craftsmanship. And yet, for some odd reason, there was never an industry attached to what they were doing. So it was something that, was very much on the fringes of what industrialization looked like. It wasn't anything, it wasn't given the primal seat you get, for example, with agriculture or with industrialization, engineering, those generic industries, I would say. So I think I began to question why we consume so much fashion on the continent, and yet there wasn't infrastructure to support it. But worse yet, when I started traveling around the world, I couldn't find it outside the continent or even outside my country. So that led me into a, almost tunnel of wanting to understand why that was the case. And very quickly, it became apparent to me that talent was never the issue. The issue was, the missing piece really was infrastructure. It was the platforms, it was trade access, it was financing, logistics, and strategic partnerships that were missing to allow designers in the creative sector to leverage that design for economic development. So that insight really shaped my work, and I started to formalize this around, I would say, 10 years ago. And through Lulubelle, of course, the idea now became, how do I build those bridges between creativity and commerce to ensure that African designers, and of course, Africa meaning on the continent and in the diaspora, are not only visible, but also positioned with systems that allow them to trade, to scale, and to generate a long-term economic value. So that became almost, a mission, a sacrificial mission. So what really ignited my commitment was recognizing that culture is not simply heritage, but it's an industry. And sadly, when you speak about industry, at least on the continent, fashion is still not defined as an industry. So that becomes the bigger mission now, to help define it as an industry that can employ and that can empower and that can generate economic wealth for the continent.
Thank you for that, Lulu. And I think what's fascinating to me in several of our conversations is, just as a creative person, as a lover of fashion, like when I see African fashion, when I see certain designers, I see the influence of African textiles and fashion and them employing and bringing it in. And I know we've had several discussions about this, of like how to create that economic opportunity, how to make African fashion, just make it something that is more evident, if you will, and more not just culturally significant, but acknowledging it. It's like seeing, hearing, and celebrating every texture and layer of it. And so as you do this work, Lulu, what are you imagining?
I think by and large, what I would like to be able to see, and I always use this analogy, I say, if I can walk into Selfridges and find African fashion sitting alongside any other global brand, not as a token, not as a pop-up, but as a permanent offering within the stores, then I know at the back end that the designers who are gainfully employed, they're running businesses that are viable and sustainable. And more importantly, they're impacting their communities because they use their artisans, and the value chain of fashion is so long. So that everybody within that value chain, be it distribution, logistics, the garment production itself, textiles, everybody is earning, because ultimately that's what really it is. So my role really is to see how we can create structural investments and coordinated infrastructure to be able to help to do this.
That's amazing. And I that was exactly, I was hoping you'd get into talking about the impact, the many layers of impact from community, the artisans, the production, all of the different, like when we as consumers see the output, the beautiful garment, we don't think about everything it takes to get there and the systems that have to be in place to make it happen. So I think I really applaud your mission, and thank you for sharing that. We're going to move back to Malvina. Apparently, Dr. Renuka Takur, our systems and sustainability leader, will not be joining us today, so we will move straight back to Dr. Malvina. And Dr. Malvina, I like this question because I think that, again, we look at outcomes, but where do you see the most urgent gap in today's health innovation ecosystem, between discovery and delivery, safety and speed, innovation and access, and what must change to close that gap? And you're on mute.
The problem today isn't the lack of incredible ideas. There's an explosion right now of fabulous ideas in the health industry. Everybody you talk to has the next best breakthrough that's going to change the world. What I'd like to visually summarize this at, however, that there is this huge chiasm. On one side are all of these great ideas that technically are very sound. Then on the other side are the patients who actually need the solutions that are going to change their health pipeline, their health future. And in between, there is this huge valley of death. And it's the valley of death where most of the medical products end up in. And the reason is that in order to get from one side of the chiasm to the other, you need two things simplistically. One is you need to have a bridge. And a bridge is a very clear direction of what needs to be done for this concept of a novel medical product to become a viable entity, a viable product that it has gone through all of the appropriate regulatory reviews and is actually utilized by the patients. Now, in order to build that bridge, you need, it's essentially a regulatory roadmap. What you need is very clear endpoints and standards in order for the inventors to understand what they need to do to evaluate and assess the impact of their great ideas in order for them to be acceptable by the regulators around the globe and acceptable by the patients who ultimately are going to be using it. So that's the bridge. The next thing is you need to, even after you build the bridge, you need to have the ability to navigate that crossing safely. The way I like to visualize it is that the bridge that you build is still going to be a suspension bridge that's going to move in the wind because the science constantly evolves, the expectations shift, and maintaining that balance as you're walking on this suspension bridge requires experience, knowledge, and a steadfast commitment to reach the other side. So that is really what is needed, very, very simplistically, because what I like to do is take very complex ideas and try to make very simple.
Oh, I love that. And I think it's interesting that both you and Lulu are talking about building these bridges. I think what's interesting about your bridge is that it's a bridge with a lot of flexibility. I'm not suggesting yours isn't, Lulu, but a lot of flexibility because of the speed of things changing. And I would imagine with AI, it's only going to change even more rapidly. And any thoughts on that, Malvina?
Yeah, so AI is one of the many items, but it's not just, the bridge, again, the bridge is your roadmap, is a roadmap of how to get from the concept of a medical product to actual patients around the globe in every single country that medical product can be used and not just used, but be contributory to the health system, right? Because ultimately we want, well, hopefully everybody who is creating medical products isn't just thinking about, the beauty of creation, but actually the impact that they're going to deliver. So that roadmap is not short. From the minute you think of the concept to the point that sometimes it's a decade. But in order for that to actually be a very predictable road, you need to constantly be willing to continue stabilizing yourself as the wind blows, so to speak, because the technologies change, the regulations change around the globe, both on a country by country basis as well as on the consensus for between the different regulators, as well as policies that influence this. And also the basic science knowledge and the clinical evidence is constantly changing. So, if you start out thinking that you're going to prove that your product A works because you're trying to demonstrate A, B, C, D, but meanwhile, it takes you 10 years, unfortunately. And during those 10 years, you find out that A, B, and C are really not the best outcomes for the patients for whom you're building this medical product. You need to see if you can figure out how to adjust and how to still get to your destination. And that's why I always like to say, again, back to my analogy of the bridge, you need to stop and really take the time to strategize and think before you get on that suspension bridge about every step that you're planning to take and every which way that you're going to be stabilizing yourself as you're crossing it. Because it's very easy if you don't plan well to fall off the bridge and then to either end up in a valley of death out of which there's no way out, or go back to the beginning and start your journey all over again. Neither one of them is really advantageous. But so again, stopping and thinking and making sure that you have the right partner, because with the rapidly evolving changes, AI including but not limited to, you need to make sure I have actually gone on a lot of suspension bridges. I love suspension bridges. I love a lot of hikes and a lot of suspension bridges. You can ask my family. I'm always one for the highest suspension bridge.
Wow.
But the part of it is, as I personally go on those hikes and I cross on the suspension bridge, I always try to walk in a straight line, but I always pick the one that has the rails, so that if the wind blows too much, I know that I can grab something and not actually fall off. So in my analogy, for a company or an inventor that wants to be very successful, you want to make sure before you get on that suspension bridge that you know who those rails are going to be, who you can lean on, he can help with when the winds shift, because they will, because we live in a very, very fast-paced world where everything is changing. And you need to make sure that if you yourself don't have the capacity to be aware of everything that's changing around you, that you can lean on that handle. You can have somebody else to help you to stabilize you and not fall off.
Yeah, no, I love the partnership. I love the bridge analogy, and I love the idea of the partnership, like the support railing, if you will. And it's interesting, like as you describe this, I can't help but think about the FDA not thinking about fast paced, but government being slow and very methodical and very system oriented. And so it's really interesting to hear sort of the dichotomy of that. But medical innovation is actually moving fast and things are changing. So I think it's an interesting world we're living in. I'm going to move to Lulu and we'll come back to Dr. Edelman next. Lulu, I love this question again. We're talking about with you and Dr. Edelman, we're talking about the gap. What's the biggest gap holding creative industries back? Is it access to capital, infrastructure, policy recognition, global market positioning? And how do we close it?
Yeah, I mean, it is all of those things that you've already stated. I think one thing we know for sure is that Africa does not lack creativity. It's a continent of 54 countries with thousands of subcultures that define what the creativity output looks like. But across board, one thing is, uniform and threads. The problem is structural investment and coordinated infrastructure. So, we face a very fragmented ecosystem. We have limited manufacturing capacity, which sadly is not what it used to be, because in the 60s and 70s, we had wonderful textile industry. But nowadays, with cheap imports from China and India and everywhere else, that has pushed aside our own industrialization, because it's just cheaper to get imports from another country, because already even cotton itself, believe it or not, if you were to import cotton from Mali to Tanzania, it would cost you much more than you were to ship it from China to Tanzania. So we have that limited manufacturing capacity. We have weak or fragmented, I would say, distribution systems. It's still very challenging to distribute locally, regionally, within the continent. We have very costly logistics, especially because we rely by and large by international shipping companies or cargo courier companies. We also have the overarching problem, which is access to limited, to capital. So, and then you top all of that up with, insufficient policy recognition of fashion as an industry and as economic force. So I think, and these issues, we've been speaking about these issues for as long as I've been an adult. But, it still serves to reiterate that closing the gap requires us to have an integrated industry system. And by that, I go back to Dr. Edelman's idea also of partnerships. How do we look at this industry or the formation of this industry, not by ourselves, but involving also other partners, whether it's Europe, whether it's Asia, whether it's South America, because we can't afford to do this work in isolation. But even as we look towards building bridges across the world, and I would say maybe even with the global south particularly, we still have to look at ourselves and figure out how, first and foremost, to have dedicated financing instruments for creative businesses that provide patient capital. Because for African designers to build, fashion in general is not a typical industry where you invest in and you get your returns, within 6 months or 8 months or a year. You need at least 5 years to be able to get some sort of return, if at that. We need to find ways to create manufacturing and production hubs, and maybe regionally, that are more than just the production of apparel, but then integrate into them education, the design, what are called design guilds, everything to do with the artisanal heritage skills, and also, community welfare, so that by the time you're building industry, you actually have a value chain that is almost semi-finished, that is self-sufficient enough to be able to produce everything in one hub. And this can be regional. They can be in East Africa, they can be in West Africa, it can be South Africa, and in North Africa, but then that serves that region. So it becomes, at least, in terms of economies of scale, much cheaper for the region to be able to produce like that. Again, going back to fit for purpose education, I feel it's important that in today's world, that our educational curricula on the continent should include creativity, should include subjects like fashion and everything that comes with producing fashion, so that we can look at alternative ways of employing the youth of the future. Because, you could be a biologist and work in fashion. You could be a physicist and work in fashion. You can be a makeup artist. You can be a graphic designer, a videographer. We need to put these skills into a subset of technical skills that can be taught early on as viable options of employment, and not necessarily, trying to get everybody to go to university and coming out and finding that they can't be employed. So there's that. I think there's also the idea of, putting in place trade platforms that connect designers with regional international markets. And this is where the Africa Free Trade Area could be useful, in terms of, closing the gap between, countries, between the regions, making it more affordable to export within the continent as it is outside the continent as well. And of course, supportive policies that recognize the creative economy as a serious contributor to the GDP. It's high time. I'm frustrated as to why this is not so obvious. So I think if we and the other thing also, I think, is we can't wait and rely on government to do all of these things. I think private sector, small, medium businesses like my own, consultants, researchers, policymakers, everybody needs to come on board and figure out what part of the equation they're solving for. Because we need all of us. We can't rely on government to solve these problems for us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Both of you, so much to unpack in both of these answers. Lulu, what goes through my head is really around the value chain, the impact of every single person and the ability to job creation. So it's not just it's a space. I mean, I went to art school. I didn't go for fashion, but that was the right place for me. And I think creativity, being an inventor and an idea person, is a spectacular space to live in, because the truth is AI can't really compete with that per se. I mean, they come up with ideas, don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, but I'm just talking about the origination. So I think, and when we think of fashion, it's interesting when I think of Africa and the embodiment of the women and the men and the way they show up, so proud in their fashion, in their textiles. So it's like you look at the value chain, you look at the output to the end user, and it's just so much good in terms of job creation and the end product, the beauty, the wearable, the apparel, as you said, but the fact that it could be a biologist, researcher, what have you. I think that's a fascinating conversation to have. I think the other side of it is, and I think Malvina, now no longer in the FDA, in the government, would say, like, yeah, you're going to need the government, but also it's really important that these other businesses, small, medium, large businesses really support the growth of this, because it is the future. Fashion's never going away. So it's how
Yeah.
do you make it sustainable, and how do you understand when we think of African fashion? I mean, I just love the textiles, the richness. When I see some of the work that you're doing, I'm just in awe of it. So in any case, we're going to move back to Dr. Edelman, and this is not the last question, but I like this one for you, because we have to ask ourselves, what role should cross-sector leaders, like regulators like yourself, founders, clinicians, investors, play in closing that gap responsibly and equitably in terms of health innovation?
So, one of the main problems that we're dealing with on a very big picture is that every stakeholder tends to work in their own respective silos. And there's no way that we can close that gap and build the bridge from the great ideas for novel breakthrough medical products to the patients who need them, unless every single stakeholder in the medical product ecosystem works together, because everybody just has one part of the answer. So if you think about it, the patients, who are, I would say, are one of the most important stakeholders, are the ones who know what actually they need and what actually success looks like. So if you forget to ask them, you can be sitting in your own respective little labs and think of, the greatest, best things that you personally think will help that patient. But, I was very fortunate during my tenure at FDA uh, to lead work on the development of patient-reported outcomes. So patient voice is incredibly important for me. And that's just an example of the importance of every single stakeholder. The way again, back to my analogy of the bridge, if you only take, however, the voice of the patient and don't think about the preclinical, clinical assessment and the regulatory science that's needed, you're going to build a bridge that's going to only go half the way of the gap, and you're still going to end up in the valley of death. The same thing as if, you only, the same thing as if you're a wonderful industry leader, but don't think about the regulations. You don't think about the economic models. You don't think about the latest clinical research that shows that, a particular assessment and particular endpoint is really the latest way to treat a particular disease, or has shown to take, basically clinical evidence. Again, your bridge is only going to be it's going to be closing, let's say, 3/4 of the gap, and you're still going to fall into that valley of death. I keep trying to make it very pictorial, so hopefully everybody
I'm not
understands.
sure I love the Valley of Death, but I get it.
It's truly only if every single stakeholders unite and work together and bring all of their respective experience and their respective understanding and their respective perspective together, that this true bridge or the roadmap can exist. Now, the other thing, again, it's something I've mentioned before, but I want to re-emphasize it. As everybody is building this bridge, I think it's imperative that everybody keeps the destination in focus. And the destination is not just creating another gadget. It's not just creating another sugar pill that you can charge for. The destination is the patient access to transformative technologies. So as long as we make sure that we put that first, because no matter who you are in the ecosystem, as long as everybody understands the goal, and I would say 99.9% of people who are in this space are there because they're passionate about transforming people's health. And as long as we don't forget that in the process and unite and make sure that everybody works together in a pre-competitive way in order to build the ecosystem, that's what's really needed to change ideas into actual medical products in patients' hands.
Thank you for that. I think that that is very educational. And what comes to mind for me is I love what you said, Dr. Edelman, around we have to create for patients' needs, not just another pill, not just another medical gadget that's going to make us money. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's a great thing. Yeah. However, what are the unmet needs that we can be solving for? The other thing that has stuck out very clearly to me is really understanding that every stakeholder is required to make this happen. You cannot create a medical product or a healthcare innovation product that doesn't really serve and have all the stakeholders behind it. And so I think that it's a great message. I think, in terms of thinking about health innovation, is there anything, as we talk about that, Dr. Edelman, when we think about understanding the needs of the patients, how do you, because you're one of the stakeholders and at times have been probably a few stakeholders, how do you see that? Like, how do you go after and understand the unmet need?
So having the patient voice actually drives the conversation. As I said, I've been very, very fortunate to be part of the transformative process at the US FDA, where we actually wrote together a number of guidance documents that talks about patient voice translation into regulatory science. How do you do that? How do you get evidence, and how do you show what patients want and what risks they're willing to accept for certain benefits?
Mm. Thank you. I'm just sitting with that. I'm pausing for a second, but I like that. And I love the fact that you incorporated that while you were at the US FDA. The patient voice is as central to determining that. I think that's amazing. We're going to move on to Lulu. Lulu, what would it take to move from celebrating culture to structurally investing in it as an economic asset? I love this question because we're such creative people, but at the end of the day, how do we make it an economic asset that will have impact at scale?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, it's also a narrative issue. I think we need to redefine what culture is and how it is an investable industry. So there must be, I think, a branding exercise, whether it's at African, international, global, regional, and local levels, to be able to begin to showcase and outline how it is an investable industry. And I think, for that, we need, of course, capital. We need governments, we need the development banks, we need private sector investors to create financing mechanisms that are designed for the peculiarities of the creative industries. Sounds easy, it's easier said than done, but we need, you need one or two people or one or two entities to start, and then, it grows from there. Secondly, we need access to market. It's one thing to create a beautiful product, but if you can't sell it, what's the use? And fashion and apparel are basic needs, just as food and water and a place to stay are. But again, they need structure, and structure into entries, into trade shows, into retail networks, into international distribution channels. And this is where I go back again to partnerships. How do we build that bridge between the continent and the rest of the world? Because the consumer is also out there, much as it is on the continent that has almost 1.2 billion people that need clothing, that need fashion. And then again, third, I think international institutional recognition. I think, as I said, we need to sit, and discuss at government level, at institutional level, how we put fashion and design into national economic development strategies. And in many countries in Africa, fashion sits within the cultural ministry, for example. It should sit within the trade industry. So even that shift allows people to view the sector with another set of eyes. And therefore, that would mean integrating, it's one thing to integrate it into national development strategies, but, how do we also define culture in the 21st century that is an economic force? And how do we now dilute that all the way down into the educational curricula that we employ to ensure that, like in France, for example, I saw this recently, where you had little kids who were, I think, in kindergarten. And this was earlier on it was in September, where they had the fashion week. A kindergarten class was taken to see the Chanel show. And they were given pencils, drawing pencils and paper to recreate what they saw. It was an installation of the fashion collection and reimagine it in their own way. So already at that age, they were already being inspired to think about the arts as a viable option for them, as part of their future job market. So, it's simple things like that, and it requires a mindset shift. But, celebration, I say, is always important, and we are big on celebration, but investment is what builds industries, and it's time we invest in building these industries.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've had several conversations about African fashion and the brilliance of it, fashion in general. But I mean, I think that we're talking today about African fashion. I think what stuck out with me, Lulu, as well, is your comment around it's not just about, yes, it's cultural, but we need to get it from culture to trade shows. And I think it would be, not to trade shows, I'm sorry, into trade. It would be great if you could explain a little more what you mean by that, because that's stuck with me as, that's a shift in mindset as well, but it's also a shift in making it more, I would say, business, if you will.
Yes. I mean, it goes back to everything I've said, because we look at fashion today from a cultural perspective, and it's defined by where we come from, and therefore how we make it is the definition of who we are as a people. So by and large, it has just become that. However, when we go back to how fashion is produced, is where the business of fashion comes in. Because you need industry, you need machinery, you need manpower, you need resources, you need electricity, you need education, you need experts. And that becomes the commercial composition. This becomes the commercial ask to relook and to reassess the industry for what it can do for the countries, for the continent. And therefore, how do we change the language of fashion as culture to fashion as business? I think this is where we need, again, to bridge these two worlds and let it make sense for policymakers, for investors, and for everybody else concerned.
Well, and it's just like we were talking with Dr. Edelman, which is it requires every stakeholder. So,
Yes.
so back to Dr. Edelman's comment, to get a product through medical innovation, an end medical product, pill or device, it requires every stakeholder to be part of the process. I think
Yeah.
the difference here as it relates to the African fashion is it requires every stakeholder to get, no, actually, it's a parallel. It's parallel.
It's a
It's
parallel, but
absolute parallel.
yeah, it's a parallel, but then I also have to point out that Africa is 54 countries. So you also have all the subsets of the different countries and their own, requirements and their own challenges. Because you have countries that are far more advanced, like South Africa, for example, as far as the infrastructure is concerned. You have other countries that have more access to global markets, for example, like the Nigerian fashion market. So it's understanding what each microclimate requires, but then overall, it's really about the continent. Right. So how do we all play and from a country macro level, but also from the macro level in terms of, the designer actually and what they're able to produce and how they're able to produce it and sell it.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
So much goes through there's so many ways to pick that apart, but it goes through my mind in terms of the countries within Africa, because I would imagine that they're very culture oriented versus trade, thinking of it as a business. So talk about like thinking of a system change for all of you. It's really changing, the way we look at things. So I think that's it. That's an interesting journey you are on and work to be done.
A
And
lot of
and
it.
it's just I applaud that you're doing it. We're going to move back to Dr. Edelman. And then we're going to have a little bit of a close, and we'll open up for some questions. But Dr. Edelman, I love this. How are you personally marching for change in this next chapter of your work and life?
Well, thank you for that question. After 30 years, yesterday was exactly 1 year since since I left the FDA, so the timing is just amazing. So it gave me a chance to reflect yesterday on what I did within my first year. As I said, innovation is in my blood, and my passion for innovation is something that my father truly installed in me. So I knew as a little girl that I wanted to spend my life bringing medical product innovation into reality. And then, after 30 years, after I left FDA, I knew that I wanted to continue that just with a different lens. And I'm a very much a big picture person. People often ask me what makes your approach different. And I like to say that I think of myself as flying on a helicopter with a big magnifying glass. So I like to see a big picture, but when I need to understand the problem, I bring the helicopter down and take my magnifying glass out to examine the details so I can find the best solution. So when I left FDA, I sort of did the same thing. I tried to figure out big picture what really is needed in order to help medical product innovation transform the speed and efficiency. As I said, there's enormous number of incredible ideas for great new medical products that have truly the potential to transform many lives. And I was trying to figure out on a systemic level, how can I make that whole ecosystem, that whole transformation more efficient. Medical products that have truly the potential to transform many lives. And I was trying to figure out on a systemic level, how can I make that? Okay.
I'm so, I'm so everybody. That was YouTube happening simultaneously with Zoom. This is our first time on a Zoom on a YouTube live, so apologies. So, but it doesn't hurt to repeat that, though.
There you go.
But anyway, so please continue.
So again, so back to my analogy of what it takes to truly bring to close the chiasm between the medical products and the patients who need them. I started out my first year of post FDA by becoming CEO of the Collaborative Community on Ophthalmic Innovation. And that is an incredibly powerful organization. It's the only nonprofit global organization with the goal to truly address every single question that and every single issue that stands between groundbreaking medical products in ophthalmic space and the patients who need them. The beauty of it is that every single stakeholder, patients, industry, academia, regulators from around the globe, investors, we all work together in a pre-competitive space in order to delineate the appropriate endpoints and standards and to generate standards that will create a very clear roadmap for a brand new medical products to get to the other side of the chiasm. That's the bridge. So that's the building the ecosystem. And I spend, quite a significant number of my year truly spending day and night trying to figure out how we can do that. And I'm really excited to say that the transformation within the last year has been beyond any of my even dreams and hopes. The organization has grown exponentially. We have 3,500 members around the globe. We have now meetings and workshops almost on a monthly basis, all on every single continent. We have 18 different work groups with KOLs leading their respective work streams in areas where people think, of ophthalmic medical products such as cornea, retina, pediatrics, but also in areas that are just on the edge of becoming a reality. And one of them is oculomics, which I'm incredibly excited about. And for those of you who don't know what oculomics is, remember you heard it on this station. Oculomics is the ability to utilize data from the eye in order to diagnose and treat systemic health conditions. And this is not, this is not futuristic. This is here. We have a lot of data. We have a lot of medical products in that space. And CCOI is working diligently to create a roadmap. I'm so excited about it that I've actually modified the mission statement of CCOI to include that. And I currently have KOLs from 3 different continents co-leading this work group. It's extremely intense, a huge group. And at the excitement was palpable in the space. At the meeting that we just had in Hong Kong last month, I think I had the biggest panel I've ever led. I believe we had close to 18 KOLs at the table, and the room was standing room only. There's that much excitement about that space. The more we talk about it, the more the rest of the world understands that what we ophthalmologists knew for a long time, and why many of us have gone into ophthalmology, that you can, eye is truly the window to your body. You can truly look in and see what's going on the rest of your body. And now we can use AI to help us do that. So that's one area that's truly exciting. And then another area is that the latest work group we just started is robotics. So robotics is something that is really very active in other subspecialties, but in ophthalmology, there's currently no approved robotics medical devices. So that's another work group that is creating a lot of excitement. In any case, not to downplay the rest of the 16 work groups, all 18 work groups have very, very exciting work streams. And the only reason I highlight oculomics and robotics, it's because it's the two areas that are totally novel, and there aren't really any approved medical products in that space. So the beauty of CCOI is that it's creating a roadmap for products that are established, as well as those that sounds like science fiction to many people who aren't in that space. Now, as I got comfortable with the ecosystem that has been created, and I want to thank our industry members and sponsors that came in and supported the organization and made that work viable, sustainable, and gave me the ability to hire incredible staff that can now actually orchestrate day-to-day operations, because I went from 10 fingers doing at the beginning of the year to actually a wonderful staff that can run a very successful, efficient nonprofit. I decided to move on to my second part of my vision, which is trying to create something that is going to give the industry or the sponsors the ability to actually navigate the crossing safely. Something that where I can partner with individual companies. And so with that in mind, I'm very, very proud to be one of the 3 co-founders of Solution Health with Dr. Mark Blumenkratz and Daniel Ting. And Solution Health combines deep regulatory expertise with AI-enabled tools to help innovators translate the evolving frameworks into practical development and regulatory strategies that move technologies from concepts to global adoption. So simplistically, we exist to make breakthrough innovations not just possible, but predictable, scalable, and successful. In other words, you can think of Solution Health as that rail on the suspension bridge. Now that the bridge exists, every time there's a wind blowing and you don't know if you're going to fall down, Solution Health is that extra railings that you can lean on to make sure that you don't fall off.
I just want to celebrate you, the way you're marching for change. What I think is really interesting, Dr. Edelman, is the fact that you left the FDA, you started in the nonprofit with CCOI and running that and getting your partners and sponsors to help support build that infrastructure there that you had. I love the fact that you're touching all those different areas. And oculomics is really appealing to me, not to share, but I've had some recent eye issues. And so having had the eye issues, the idea of being able to diagnose anything through my eyes is very appealing to me. So I applaud that work and I'm excited. And congratulations on Solution Health. It's clear that your next chapter is going to be such an interesting combination of both, the nonprofit side and the support on the for-profit side. So congratulations and well done on marching for change. Lulu, how are you personally marching for change? And know if it's this next chapter of your life. I know more specifically for Dr. Edelman having left the FDA, but how would you say you're marching for change in work and life?
Up until now, my work has really been centered on changing perceptions around what African fashion is and what it looks like and its potential. it's been also around providing access to learning and pathways to access to markets. But now, especially from now, 2026, is I'm really centering on building long-term structures for the creative economy. And, one of the ways I'm beginning to do that, as you know, is, the initiative, the Alcheball that we're launching at the end of the year, which is first and foremost a celebration of what African culture and African fashion is all about. So, think of it as, the nearest thing I can equate it to is like the Met Gala. This is called the Alcheball, and Alche meaning, and it comes from the inspiration of Alkebulan, which is considered the first original name of Africa. But then it's also an acronym that, when you look at it, it spells out the arts, legacy, knowledge, and enterprise.
Oh,
And
that's
and the
that's
idea,
great.
yes, the idea for the ball is really to raise an endowment for the industry. So all the things I've been talking about, I want to do this in the micro level. I can do it as one person, building it with community and partners across the world and on the continent. I mean, my team has people from all the way from Senegal, Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, South Africa. I also have teams outside in Bahrain, in the US. So it's really coming together of the creative ecosystem, building for Africa. So we can actually create sustainable platforms that generate capital, that provide visibility and access and institutional support for African designers and artisans. But at the same time, I'm not stopping what I've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years ago. So therefore, in continuing to expand partnerships across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, in the diaspora, and really to continue to strengthen trade relationships and open new markets, bring in new partners. I mean, right now, I don't know if you saw about 2 weeks ago, we launched 6 designers in Harrods through the London Fashion Week, and that was in collaboration with Brand 63 Africa, a nonprofit organization based here in the UK. So also looking at what other people are doing and building those bridges and holding each other's hands and say, let's do these things together. So it's, we're ambitious, but we want to ensure that creativity is supported by the same level of infrastructure and investment and access to markets as any other major fashion industry in the world, because I feel we have something to contribute to. And if we can use what we know as our culture through fashion to create this economic power for the next generation, then so be it. I'm all here for it.
That's wonderful. I celebrate everything that you're doing to March for Change. I mean, you've been marching for change, you and Dr. Edelman, for so many years. I think what's really, Lulu, what I'm really touched by is you have this like very deep creative side in the fashion sense. I watch all of yours, the designers coming in. I think you are such an interesting combination of the creativity and then the business side and being really creative on a business level as well. And I think that that's just something to be applauded because it's one of these industries where I think that creatives creating the end product don't often, really think about all of the layers and I continue to talk about the onion, peeling back all the things that need to happen for the end product. Again, just like Dr. Edelman. So the work you're doing to march for change, to really build this ecosystem and this economy, if you will, for African fashion is tremendous. I love the idea. I didn't realize Lulu had shared with me the Alki Ball, but I didn't realize that what it stood for, which is really brilliant. And so African legacy, knowledge, and yeah, an enterprise. So I thought it was a very creative name. I didn't know it was an acronym, but again, that's marching for change. I love the fact that you're combining the education, the knowledge, the education. And if we can bring in the education with all the work we're doing into the early years of our children, of the next generations, the generations to come, so they understand the value of the different things that we're creating not just as humans, but as I would say, as women today, right? It's just amazing. I'm going to open it up to Amy to take any, if it's okay, before we close out. Amy, if you would like to share and be part of this, that would be great.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I just want to say how much I've enjoyed listening and tuning in to both of you ladies, Malvina and Lulu. You're just such an inspiration to our world. And I personally thank you for taking the time to be with us on this platform and for our first YouTube Live. So we don't have any questions right now in the chat. I feel like we had such a full conversation here, and you both went into so much and shared so much. And so, but I wanted to again just personally come on and thank you. And I look forward to following all of your endeavors and see you at our next event.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you both, Elizabeth and Amy, for the opportunity, and even more so for the vision of having a program like this, of having a program where you celebrate Women's March for Change. I mean, that sort of is consistent with just the vision and the perseverance to actually make a difference. So for closing, I want to thank you for doing this, for putting in the energy to create a platform.
And
You
I
on mute,
second that.
Elizabeth.
I think I second that. It's a wonderful experience also not to feel isolated, because when in the work that I do, I sometimes feel like it's the only industry that has issues. But it's good to hear you, Dr. Edelman, and to know that we share some commonalities in the challenges we face. And that's also, it's heartening. Challenges as they are, but at least it doesn't feel so isolating. So I thank you, Elizabeth, for putting this together. It's a game of endurance, and I commend you for your endurance, because it's not easy to commit to these platforms in the way you do it.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm so touched by that for multiple reasons. First, I just want to say thank you. I am so grateful to have your leadership in this room, in this space. What I have felt very fortunate about is being able to bring these amazing leaders into our virtual rooms and to create these, what used to be monthly, now we're moving to quarterly events. But March for Change really mattered to me. When we started this season of podcasts, by the way, I'm off script here, everybody. But when we started season 5, Women's March for Change podcast, it was all about look at the time we're living in right now. It's so important to me. Like we talked about medical innovation, we talked about fashion economies in Africa, but in general, to think about that. How do we march for change in these spaces? But look at the world we're living in today. How do we give voice to women? How do we let some women claim their voices for the first time? In other cases, reclaim their voices, whether it's in community. And so it's been, the experience for me has been really very touching and personal, because we are living, particularly Lulu, this is a global problem, but we've been really dramatically impacted in the past year and change with the administration. So marching for change, bringing women together to have these conversations, to elevate and ensure that the world sees what you guys are doing and what we're all doing, and giving voice to it, I think, is more critical than ever now. And I think that you said it, being like deeply committed. One thing, Malvina, I feel like a medical product advancing. Lulu, it's not 5 years, it's a 10-year journey. No, maybe a 5-year. But I think, we're going to be celebrating our 4th anniversary. And I think that the journey to making sure we tell every single, like, the stories matter. Keep the stories coming in. What can we do with these stories? What insight can we glean that can help shape something in healthcare, shape something in fashion, shape something in some sort of, whether it's commerce or some sort of industry, that stories have the ability to have major impact. And so, I'm really grateful to have this. I thank you. And now I do want to.
Wait, just really quick. Yep, we do have a question in the chat, so I wanted to bring this forward.
Yay.
This is from Dixie. What does it mean for an African designer to build something that outlasts them? And does the current funding environment make that even possible?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Dixie. I think for an African designer to be able to build something that outlasts them, first of all, they have to dare to dream of legacy. They have to think about creating beyond their immediate challenges. And I think this is what we've been talking about in the last hour or so, to say how does that come to play? It means that we need to support them. We need policies that support them. We need investment that supports them. We need distribution channels that support them. But before all of that, they need to dare to dream bigger than what they're dreaming now. And then to be audacious. Just like as Elizabeth has endured in this game of storytelling, designers also, fashion creatives, have to look at this as a marathon and not a sprint, because it takes a long time. And there are many reasons why one would want to stop in the middle of the process. But I can assure you, it gets better with time, because once you start building these blocks and you start your journey, the way appears, and then you get people who support you. Now, fortunately, versus what it was 10, 15 years ago, you have a lot of platforms that are supportive to African designers. There's already some funding that is coming into the mainstream pool. So there are already pots of support that are coming in, but they also have to persevere. They have to push. They have to be audacious. And they have to dare to think of themselves as a global brand. And that outlook defines how audacious they can be and how far they can go to seek help. I don't know if that answers my question.
I think so. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, thank you, Lulu.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I don't know if there's any more questions, Amy.
No, I don't think nothing's popped up now. So I think we're
Wonderful.
good. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank each Malvina, Dr. Edelman, and Lulu Chabelle for sharing your insights and your work and all that you're doing to move the world forward. I'm just so grateful to be in this room with you. And for everybody at Under the Sisterhood, we believe that when women share their lived experiences, patterns emerge. And I know Dana's listening, and those patterns have the power to reshape systems and inspire meaningful change. So to everyone watching today, we invite you to continue these conversations, to share these stories. It's critical, and to join us as we continue marching for change together. Thank you for being part of our sisterhood and for joining us today. Thank you.